You're watching Sleep 101, Getting to the Root Cause of Sleep by Dr. Alyssa Gall on Resonance Wellness TV, part of our Whole Life Medicine Alleviate series. Keep in the loop about future webinars and events on whole-life-medicine.com. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to Sleep 101. My name's Dr. Alyssa Gall, and I'll be your host and guide this evening about all things sleep. As usual, this presentation is given in the context of the whole life medicine model. And so when we talk about sleep, we're talking about starting points in both Alleviate and Align in the whole life medicine model. In short, there's 6 considerations that we're going to look at. The first is to consider what are the root causes in our health situation. So we have to ask ourselves, what is the setup? The second is to look at the state of the tissues involved. And in the clean slate processes, we're looking at how to improve the cleaning up of the tissues that get bogged down in disease processes. We also look at missing ingredients. So there are things that do affect sleep that we find here. But with sleep issues, we also need to discuss approaches that belong much more to the Align level of health strategy. Sleep issues are often related to stress patterning and condition programs in the autonomic nervous system and the body's psychoneuroendocrine immunological response. Now, I know that's a big word. It was invented about 20, 30 years ago now. It basically means that the psyche, the nervous system, the hormones, and the immunity are one functioning unit. You can't tear them apart. And of course, recent events have started to show us a little bit more about that. And so on the road to awareness, we can really connect what we're carrying in all of those areas with sleep interference. You could also do a survey of events and wounds that can be in the way of your body's healing. And an inventory of energy-changing health challenges like surgeries or injury, dental problem, chronic infection, other types of physical trauma. So what parts of your body are under the most stress and what areas have become less responsive and less open to normal regulation. So sometimes you actually need to figure out how to reconnect a pathway to become more aligned. And lastly, but not least, is revitalize. So we call this the Thrive and Revive support systems. And that's really about learning about how to create great life support systems through diet, maintenance of problem spots that you know you already have, the kind of exercise that's suited to you, learning basic meditation or heart math or qigong or breath work, and then starting to really design aspects of your life on purpose. So let's dive into our topic. So I wanted to start this discussion by looking at sleep stages and sleep cycles. So I'm going to give you the scientific background of sleep. So let's first talk about sleep stages. So there are basically 4 main stages of sleep. Sometimes people will group them into 3, plus rapid eye movement or REM sleep. So most people have heard about the stages of sleep, and I've just noticed there's confusion sometimes about what stage does what. The stage is kind of that you're first kind of coming into is REM sleep. It's the most like being awake, but in theory you should be paralyzed so you don't act out your dreams unless you have a sleep disorder. And so in essence, you have rapid eye movements, so you're actually dreaming and having story processes going on in your mind, and you really need that kind of sleep for memory consolidation and also for emotional control. It's about 25% of normal sleep time. And sometimes people feel like they don't actually dream a lot. A lot of the time, it's not so much that you don't dream. It's just that you're not totally aware of your dreams, or the dream timing is a bit different in you. As you can see, what you normally get for REM cycles is that you get more of them later in the night before you're waking up. So I don't know if you've had this experience, but I've certainly had the experience of kind of like coming into awareness from a dream just before I'm about to wake up, or the alarm becomes part of your dream, or whatever else is waking you up is becoming part of your dream. It's because you tend to concentrate that later on in the night. Now, your non-REM sleep stages. So this is sleep stages where you don't see the rapid eye movements. The first stage, or stage one as it's marked here, is transitional sleep. You actually don't spend much time in transitional sleep unless you're really not a good sleeper. It's usually about 2 to 5% of the total time. So most people have the impression that they're not sleeping during stage one, even though they are. So it's a type of light sleep, and if you poke somebody in stage one, they will be able to be aware of you, and they'll also say, "Stop bugging me," but to you, they'll actually have looked asleep. The second stage is obviously stage two. That's about 45-55% of our sleep, big chunks, in combination with like not dreaming. It's kind of getting closer to the more restorative sleep. About 45 to 55% of your sleep is going to be stage two. And then you can see that there's deeper sleep, stage 3 and 4. This is slow wave sleep or delta sleep. It's got slow and high amplitude waves, and we're going to see the chart of the brain waves in a second. And this is where a lot of secret things happen. It's very important for physical repair and learning. In stage 4, there's almost no muscle activity in your body at all. And growth hormone is secreted here. So there's a lot of restorative actions that are happening. But you will notice that it's not a lot of your sleep. And it's not because you don't need that, but it's because once you get into that stage of sleep, you actually don't need as much of it as you might think. So then those are the sleep stages. We're going to look at it from a different perspective a couple of times as we're going along here. But let's now take a look at sleep cycling. So what you'll see in an adult, and you can see that this line is basically going up and down. So you're going from waking through REM, through stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. Well, you don't really go into REM when you first fall asleep. You drop right into stage 1 there. You can see there's no blue peak. The blue peaks really represent the dreaming. So at first, you don't go through a dream. You go right down into stage 1. So this cycle tends to happen in an adult every about 90 to 110 minutes. So adults cycle through light sleep to deep sleep with a little bit of REM kind of on the top of it. And a normal sleeper, as you get further in the night, a normal sleeper is not usually aware of waking, although most people do wake and kind of scan the room and then go back to sleep. But typically that's amnesic, and people don't remember, even if you've seen your bed partner wake up and kind of look around or appear to be awake, and that they normally go back and they don't remember that they've actually opened their eyes. And sometimes they don't remember speaking to you either. So you'll see that those wakenings start to become more likely as you get closer and closer to morning. So there's no more stage 3 sleep after about 4 or 5 hours. People sleep more lightly later in the sleep period. Now, to contrast this to littler kids, in a newborn, a sleep cycle is about 50 minutes. By the time kids get to be about 3, it'll be about 60. By about 5 years, it'll be close to 90. So close to the adult length by about school age. And the odd kid will take longer to go through those cycles. And sometimes an adult might have a slightly longer, slightly shorter sleep cycle, but the average is about this. So what's important about that is that a sleep cycle all the way up and down, sometimes if people are having poor sleep quality and they come into those nighttime awakenings, or they're spending more time in stage 1 sleep and REM sleep as it's getting later in the night, they assume that they're not sleeping at all when they actually are. So again, we're going to talk about this in more detail. So now, from a sleep efficiency perspective, you actually want to be asleep about 85% of the time minimally that you're in bed. That's good sleep 85% of the time. So, and we'll come back to sleep efficiency in a second. So let's take a look at age and sleep from a different perspective. So like I said, I gave you a sense of what the sleep cycle times were like for different ages, but here we can look at how sleep stage times are varying with age. And so what you generally will see, as you can see illustrated here, is that the relative amount of sleep decreases over time. So left here, that's age 5. You see that I just kind of typed in here 10 hours, 7.5 hours, and 5 hours just to give you a sense of what those minute markers were, because when I was looking at it, wasn't totally registering for me. So when you're really, really small, obviously you're spending a lot more time in sleep. And then as you're getting older, you're getting less sleep and different kinds of sleep. So sleep latency, which is the yellow section that's floating on the top of this, that's about how many minutes it takes between turning off the light and falling asleep. Up to 30 minutes is actually considered normal. And it's usually a typical time frame for the specific person. Some people will take a shorter amount of time, some will take a longer amount of time, but most people are consistent over time. The blue layer that's labeled WASO or WASO there is wake after sleep onset. This is where the person is aware of being awake, or it could be a post-apneic event. So you have a breathing event that somebody becomes aware of and startles themselves awake. And you'll see that this obviously increases a lot by middle age. So 35, 40 is when you start to see more apneic events that people are aware of. The random eye movement layer, so the dreaming layer, which is red, that stays fairly stable over age, maybe a little bit less dreaming as you're getting older, but not substantially different. The biggest change as you get a lot older is the amount of slow wave restorative sleep. So there's a bit of a smush of that. You can see by age 85 here, it's really changed. And you got to remember that, when people are younger, there's a lot more growth and development going on. And remember I said that kind of sleep is the kind of sleep where you see growth hormone and other major reparative strategies happening. So of course, there's going to be much more of that when you're younger. And as you're getting older, even though ideally we'd probably have a little bit more of that, you're kind of coming out of your body a little bit more by then. And so some of the reparative processes are just not as strong. Stage 2, which is the pink area, that's pretty steady across the lifespan, as is stage 1. So again, if somebody has a sleep disorder, they could have a relatively higher stage 1, stage 2 sleep and less REM and stage 3. That's not illustrated here, but hopefully you'll get the idea as we kind of march through some of these slides. So the next thing I wanted to show you was a chart of EEG recordings during sleep. So this is the electrical activity of the brain. It's an electroencephalogram. This is different than an electrocardiogram that's measuring your heart. It's not the different technology. It's just measuring it over a different part of your body. So this is basically what we also know as brain waves. So this particular chart is showing us recordings about how different waking and non-REM, which are all the other stages of sleep, and REM are from a brain wave perspective. So that you can tell in non-REM sleep, you can have sleep thoughts, but they're not story-like as in REM. The waves are faster. You can see they actually look more like waking. You see the top line there is awake. And the non-REM sleep, again, hard to wake people up from, and people can be groggy if they get up during like a deeper phase of sleep. So you can see also that this diagram mentions K complexes and sleep spindles. These are characteristics of sleep that we see, or particular kinds of brain activity that we see, and they represent certain things. So K complexes are these large waves that stand out from the background of the EEG. You can see that they're showing something similar to that in stage 2 here. And what they are occurring in response to are environmental stimuli, such as sounds in your bedroom. So even though you're going to be quite asleep, your brain is paying attention to what's going on around you. So I just want you to kind of like put that in the pipe for a little bit later, because we're going to discuss that. So part of you is always aware what's going around around you, at least in stage 2 for sure. Now, the thalamus is one of the prime generators of sleep spindles in the EEG activity, and it's involved in regulating our sleep. So sleep spindles signal greater activity in the parts of the thalamus that help us resist external stimuli. So there are K complexes, which are in response to environmental stimuli, and then there's kind of an inhibition effect with a sleep spindle to try and actually resist being awoken by those things. So spindles play an essential role in sensory processing and long-term memory consolidation. And during sleep, you'll see them in the brain as like a burst of activity immediately following muscle twitching. And I have to tell you this story. that yeah, I don't know how many of you know me well enough to know that I'm just like horribly addicted to books and libraries and stuff. And one time when I was living in England, I'd ordered this book from Amazon, and Amazon in the United Kingdom is blissfully rapid, because you're on an island that's like a postage stamp size. So they deliver really fast. And I knew the Amazon guy was going to come, and he always came so early. So I heard him outside, I'm sure. And I must have heard him crunching up the walk. We used to have a gravel drive. And when he knocked on the door, I launched out of bed. It was like it registered. I swear I must have been in stage 2 because I jumped out of bed and my legs did not work. So basically, I don't even know how I managed to launch out. I think I launched my upper body. My upper body must have gotten more weight. And then I literally crumpled to the ground, and it really hurt because they just put rug over like concrete basically there. But I recuperated just enough. I kind of dragged my leg a little bit and I did get my book. So there you go. It's possible potentially to wake up from that state. And it's, part of these things are confusing because again, we're relying on our subjective experience of what's going on. I mean, clearly I was woken up out of a serious paralysis situation there. So I was definitely not dreaming when I must have registered them. It's my commitment to books really showing up on a neurological level. So I wanted to discuss a little bit about sleep cycle apps. I'm sure that you are aware that there's a variety of apps available out there now to monitor sleep cycles. So they're supposed to be designed to measure when you enter deeper periods of sleep, mostly by movement. So like a Fitbit monitor as an example is monitoring certain signs about you that would indicate that you are getting into a certain stage of sleep, or when your potential for REM sleep is the highest, and what those timelines are like. And to a degree, you can monitor your current sleep tendencies, and it can give you an awareness of how best to maximize your sleep time and figure out where your sleep cycles are. And there's apps like Sleep Cycle or Snore Lab. But I would caution you in a few ways about these apps. They're generally not validated measures of sleep quality. This means it can give you a ballpark idea about your sleep, but they're not diagnostic for sleep disorders. And that's why it's such a rigmarole to go to the sleep lab and get your sleep tested. It's a really complex assessment. There's actually really only one device that I know of that is, of course, always on the more expensive side, something called an actigraph. That is a validated sleep measure. And you can get it like in a kind of a watch format as well, but it's one of the ones that actually has research that shows it correlates well with sleep lab assessments. I think the other thing about sleep cycle apps is sometimes they contribute to an emphasis of what could potentially be wrong with you. And again, because they're not 100% accurate, and they can't be because the technology is just not in like a Fitbit or in a phone app in the same way. I don't want people to become over attached to what those graphs are saying. Again, they're great guidelines. They're great to give you a sense of what you think you're doing. But we've experimented with patients with this, and I had a patient who had Snore Lab attempt to scream on purpose to see if she could register the screaming, because she actually had quite significant episodes of screaming at night, and we were trying to kind of narrow down whether or not we could figure out when those things were and what was happening at the time. But it actually turned out that even if she screamed randomly, you couldn't tell on the sleep thing. Although it does pick up snoring, I think, fairly well. Now, there are a handful of validated sleep questionnaires that can help in sleep assessment. And if you're interested in those, ask me for a copy of those the next time you're in. There's a couple of various ones that we can make available. Now, obviously, there's lots of people who are participating on this sleep webinar already. Tons of you registered. And part of that is because even if you do a random survey, about 35% of people will tell you that they have some type of sleep complaint. About 30% will actually have one or more of the insomnia complaints, the official insomnia complaints, which basically include difficulty initiating sleep or maintaining sleep, waking up too early, or finding sleep non-restorative. About 10% will report daytime impairment or distress. Technically, that's required for the official diagnosis. And there are other sleep complaints that get wound into this, like 48% of people snore to their own awareness or to others' awareness. About 11% will snort or gasp or stop breathing with or without wake ups. 16% of people have trouble falling asleep. And about 20% of people report not being able to return to sleep. So even though there are so many sleep complaints, only about 4.2% of people are really diagnosed with sleep apnea, and about 1.2% with actual chronic insomnia that's of medical concern. And about 0.4% of people will have the diagnosis of restless leg syndrome. There's actually about 59 distinct sleep disorders, according to the American Academy of Sleep Science, but very few of us actually suffer from a clearly delineated sleep disorder. And we're going to talk about some of the reasons why that perception is there and why we all seem to have trouble with sleep. So obviously, one of the biggest health challenges that people are facing, at least to their own awareness, is a lack of sleep. It's estimated that like 50 to 70 million North Americans suffer from a sleep or wakefulness issue. And given that to be healthy, we want to be spending about a third of our entire lives asleep. That's a pretty big figure. So obviously this can be due to a number of reasons. And as with all health issues, like we talked about in the first couple of slides, it can be influenced by all sorts of factors. It can be that people are not creating space in their schedule for adequate sleep, or they're not understanding the importance of it, and therefore they're letting sleep-related responsibilities kind of go by the wayside. So what we want to do is we want to attend to our sleep-related needs, and that way we can really ensure the rest of our day is going to be better and enhance our health and our productivity levels and cultivate a much deeper connection with ourselves and the world around us, because we'll actually have the energy to do so. So a good night's sleep for an adult, on average, is defined by a period of 6 to 9 hours, depending on the individual's activity levels. So this range is considered normal. Only about 2% of people sleep less than 6 hours and maintain their health. And yeah, you totally heard me on that. Like 98% of people need more than 6 hours of sleep. I've had many people say they don't need that much sleep, but physically you really do. So you can probably be alive with like 6 hours or less, but you're going to start to suffer a lot if you try and continue at that level. And by not taking the time to sleep, you actually start to self-create very significant health challenges. So let's look at some of what those challenges start to be, because there are really marked effects of sleep deprivation. So obviously when sleep is inadequate for whatever reason, fatigue is a major complaint, and there's a complaint of low energy at the top of the list. But there can also be attention and concentration, obviously memory problems. We just saw how certain stages of sleep are really involved in memory consolidation. There can be impaired social or family or occupational or academic performance, just in general, even if you can't identify that it's attention related. There can be mood disturbances. There are obviously daytime sleepiness. There can be behavioral problems, especially in kids. Sometimes what you'll see is that, in a hyperactivity situation, you just see a kid that doesn't get enough sleep, and as a consequence is trying to stay awake. And this is one of the behavioral things that can sometimes come out as an expression of that. You see reduced motivation in people, even if their energy seems okay. You see a proneness for errors and accidents, and you generally see a concern about dissatisfaction with sleep. So not getting enough sleep also leaves us quite a bit more prone to developing other seemingly non-related health problems. And as the body learns to function on low levels of energy through a period of poor sleep, there's not a lot of energy left over to help aid the body in recovery from all sorts of other illnesses that might not even seem to be directly influenced. If you have not enough sleep, it's linked to diabetes, it's linked to obesity, it's linked to high blood pressure, it's linked to heart disease. It's for sure known to shorten your life expectancy. So if you look at short-term studies where subjects have deprived themselves of sleep to examine the immediate effects, you'll see that there's already a heightening of blood pressure, a lowering of blood glucose, increased inflammation, And it follows that the long-term persistence of those kinds of symptoms could actually lead to much more deeply rooted expressions of those same complaints. It can definitely lead to imbalances in the neuroendocrine system, like we talked about before. It makes us way more prone to mood swings and difficult emotional states. Physically, obviously, we have dull skin, we have dark eye circles, and a generally fatigued appearance. Now, there are also other less recognized side effects of sleep deprivation. Research has actually shown that about 20% of car accidents occur because people are drowsy. And that lack of energy causes our response to things on the road to be lower. You're basically filtering your peripheral awareness. And as a result, you're increasing the chances that you're going to make a mistake while driving. In fact, in studies that compare drunk driving to drowsy driving, it's been found that drowsy driving is much more dangerous because drunk drivers at least kind of react to what's coming at them on the road. A drowsy driver doesn't usually react at all. So they hit obstacles full on with no evasive maneuvers. So it's not just road accidents. You can make mistakes or discrepancies due to this kind of same lack of attention. And so our ability to perform well, not just behind the wheel, but everywhere else, is also pretty affected. So the question becomes, why do so many people experience this really uncomfortable and stressful sensation of not being able to sleep? To answer this question, we're basically going to take a look at a model of how sleep disturbances are created. So this is the 3P model of chronic insomnia. This is one of the classic models in sleep theory. And in essence, this graph is showing how perpetuating factors, precipitating factors, and predisposing factors are potentially involved in the production of insomnia. So when you're looking at this graph, you can see that the insomnia severity is on the left-hand side. You'll see that there's a threshold of a dashed line here that's showing the insomnia threshold. And then you're seeing 4 bars here. You're seeing the preclinical, the onset, the acute, and the chronic versions of insomnia. So preclinical means before you think you have a sleep problem, this is kind of what factors are at play. And so this gray box is showing predisposing factors. So across all of the time frames here, we pretty much might have the same predisposing factors. And then when you have like a precipitating factor, so one of the blue boxes comes up, it kicks you up over the threshold for insomnia. So a precipitating factor can be something like an acute stressor, like a mental or emotional or physical one, like pain. And what it's doing is it's pushing it over and above those predispositions. So the predispositions are like genetic predispositions or abnormalities in the way that your nervous system is running certain brain processes. There's also moderators for that, like so people of different ages and sexes and races and different medical conditions. All of those things can contribute in a predisposition way, but almost always the precipitating factor will create this kind of onset of insomnia or the perception of insomnia. And then over time, the effect of the precipitating factors declines. So you see that in an acute situation, even like you're starting to get to the point where you're now kind of over the original stressful event that you know for sure had an association with your onset of your sleep problem. And those pieces are starting to fade. But as those pieces start to fade, perpetuating factors increase. And these perpetuating factors are mostly based on you being conditioned to believing that you're having a sleeping problem. So this is now the red box. Now it gets to the point where chronically, it's no longer about the precipitating factors, and the amount of predisposing factors is the same. But now what we're actually seeing is we're seeing the influence of long-term perpetuating factors. So this is likely one of the reasons why the evidence for the use of pharmaceutical sleep medications is so poor. Most of the time, there are retrainable reasons why you're not sleeping. And the best evidence for correction of insomnia is when it's become chronic is reprogramming the perpetuating factors. So we're going to talk about this. I was going to talk about that. So I just want to point out that, this kind of psychophysiological insomnia is what results a lot of the time. So it is sometimes difficult to deal with. So during a period of this, a patient experiences a lack of sleep and their thoughts are totally preoccupied with the fact that they're currently not sleeping, and they're worried about the consequences of not sleeping and the effects and the outcomes of that. And of course, you've all had that experience of the acute, you have a big meeting, you experience a lack of sleep the night before because you're overanalyzing what could happen next day. You know that piece of the feeling, but what we're really talking about is where this now becomes so self-perpetuating, it becomes part of the problem. It definitely affects more female patients than male. There's definitely onset of anxiety as people prepare for sleep because they're worried. They're worried and they're calculating and they're watching the clock, and they get this preoccupation with sleep stemming from the initial experience of insomnia. And then this fear of returning to the state is basically creating this psychophysiological insomnia. So what we need to do under those conditions is treat it by recreating the key components that we need to reestablish sleep. So the first key component when you get yourself stuck into a situation like this is actually using sleep restriction. And what I mean by sleep restriction is not trying to sleep less, but rather it's more like time in bed restriction. That's what I'm really meaning to say here. So the goal is to really, like we were saying before, achieve about 85% sleep efficiency. So if a person is sleeping 6 hours, but they're in bed 10, the sleep efficiency is about 60%. So how do we get the sleep efficiency up and get the time asleep up? So if a person is sleeping 6 hours, you restrict the time in bed to about 6 hours for 2 weeks. And then you start to increase it by going either like 15 minutes earlier and 15 minutes later each week, so long as the sleep efficiency is 90%. So if, as an example, you're 6 hours, say it depends a little bit on the individual factors, because the important part might be that you have to get up at a certain time. So like, let's say you have to get up at 6 a.m. because that's when you have to get up and get ready to go to work. Then in essence, you would put the sleep probably from, like 12 to 6 or maybe 11:30 to 5:30. And then what you want to do is slowly increase by 15 minutes earlier and 15 minutes later each week following that 2 weeks. And so long as you are getting a pretty good sleep efficiency, like around 90%, you're going to keep on creating that widening every week a little bit more until you get back to what the required time is. And like I said, an average for most people is between 6 and 9 hours. If you know how much sleep has historically made you feel good, then that's what you want to aim for. I personally feel like I sleep the best for about 8.5 hours, maybe even a little bit past that. If I get that amount of sleep, I don't have to use an alarm clock. I sleep pretty much all the way through, and but it's longer than most people expect to sleep. I just spend the extra time. So you want to keep the sleep periods, again, the same each night. So you want to keep like the hours between consistent, just kind of slowly eking out the ends. So however it's going to work for your life, finally, that's how you want to gauge that. So while you're doing that, though, obviously, you want to take a look at some other factors. So let's look at a couple that we can do. So the first is you want to reframe certain things that you're saying to yourself and potentially change your expectations, at least at first. So when people say things like never or always, it's not a balanced view, and it really creates internal anxiety when you hold a belief that you're always saying those kinds of limiters on. So I can't tell you how many times people have told me they get zero sleep. That is just not physically possible. You would go insane. People have actually tried to see how long they could go without sleep. They become so incoherent that they look insane. So we need to use some cognitive reframing and get the can'ts and the nevers and the always out of the language about sleep. And again, remember I was saying to you before that there are stages of sleep where you don't necessarily think you're sleeping, or you have a certain amount of awareness. You don't realize you're actually in a stage of sleep, even though you're not like 100% full awake. Also, don't compare yourself to a spouse who falls asleep in 2 seconds. Like, I'm hoping that tonight you're going to get a more realistic expectation about what's normal and how to work on it. But sometimes it's really difficult, when you have somebody who, like, so many children, they just like conk out. And it's, if you tend to have those mental struggles against sleep, it's not fun to watch that. Now, if you have this skill set, you could use mental field technique to reframe these ideas. I don't know how many on this call remember how to do mental field technique, but that's the acupuncture meridian tapping technique that I've used for the last 15 plus years in my practice. It's very simple. You can get the instructions for it on the essential handouts section of the whole-life-medicine.com site. And what that's really for is to help you to reframe how you're thinking about something. So we can even use 3-part sentences in mental field technique. So if there's something like you have an idea in your head, like I'm not going to sleep tonight. You want to state the problem, even though I feel like I don't get really great quality sleep. I'm complete and whole in myself, and I'll find some way of improving this over time if I work on it. So you want to like acknowledge the problem, acknowledge that you're okay, and then create a statement that's more positive or more that's working out the problem. It can help you, along with the tapping, to really start to shift some of the ways that you're languaging those things inside of you. I also suggest that, as a side, that people do mental field technique on all of their top 10 stressors that you know about. If you're not familiar with this technique, let us know the next time you're in the office, because it really actually can make huge differences in how much stress you're carrying. And this always adds to not having a balanced view of what your internal experience is. Now, the next obvious thing that we want to do is we want to actually create some stimulus control in the environment that you're sleeping in. So this is the big second factor. It can come down to making changes in your sleep environment to improve your sleep. So we want to create strong responses to the bedroom with sleepiness and to associate the bed with sleep. So if you're really struggling with sleep, you should move any non-sleep activities to other rooms. So no more TV, don't read there. The bedroom should be clean and tidy. Sleeping with less clutter reduces the stimulation around us and the clutter in the brain. Some people just cannot turn off the, oh my gosh, my house is a mess sort of anxiety. And lots of people like store random things in their bedroom. I have seen many things in my years of home visits. So make sure it's clean and tidy. Just make a peaceful environment. Make sure your bed is big enough. If you're 6'4", you shouldn't be in a double bed. It's just not going to work. So ideally, you want a longer bed if you're tall, or a wider bed if there's 2 of you and you barely fit. It can be a really strong reduction in sleep when you're constantly aware of somebody moving around or falling off the bed around you. Minimize your outside noise. It might seem obvious, but choosing an environment that's not overly impacted by outside noise and disruption, that's a huge way you can improve sleep quality. If you you habitually seem to be more in the light sleeping phase, try to consider that when you're choosing a sleep location in your house, even if temporarily you have to move that location to get things more organized. Next, keep your room cool. Most people cannot sleep well in an overheated room, and it is a major cause of waking. So if you're suffering a lot from the contrast of desired sleep temperature between yourself and your sleeping partner, you can consider a cooling bed layer or a cooling mattress pad. There's some very fancy ones that you can get nowadays that work very well. One of them is the chili pad. That one you can actually get with dual controls, and you can basically get air conditioning for underneath you. Not blowing, not in the air, but it's kind of like a gel pack that cools or warms depending on what your best sleeping temperature is. It's always better to have more blankets and more cool in the room. Keep your animals out, generally speaking. We obviously love them, but in a sleep issue, having them in the room is not the best, unless you don't have a human sleep mate, in which case the research shows a pet is more comforting than not. So different strokes for different situations. Keep your bedroom as dark as possible. Again, you want to give the signal that you are going to sleep and it's dark, and there's a whole bunch of brain rhythms that we're going to talk about that have to do with dark. Close your door if possible. Again, same thing. Just don't want disturbances going past the door. If you tend to be a nervy sleeper with a lot of movement, you could consider a weighted blanket. That is a new thing, but I'm starting to see those everywhere. And it basically is a sensory, it helps kind of sensory overload you a little bit so that you're not as restless. It creates more weight on you, and the feedback within the nervous system calms you quite a bit. We used to use this a lot for children with sleeping difficulties, that who were autistic or just generally speaking have a long restless sleeps, and it does tend to improve the quality of the sleep for children in those conditions as well. You could also consider using some essential oils in a diffuser. I prefer a diffuser that can be adjusted because those smells can be very powerful, especially if you have like a cheaper diffuser where you can't really adjust it very much. In essence, an essential oil interacts with the limbic system of the brain, and that's really been shown to affect calmness. Essential oils really do great at treating infections. They're very, very highly antibacterial, antiviral. And the second thing is they have this incredible effect on the emotional state of the brain, especially the reptilian brain. So you can consider lavender, chamomile essential oil, sandalwood, along, cedarwood. Less is more, though, in essential oils. You don't want to be overpowered to the point where all you smell is lavender, because that will also interfere with your sleep. But the light scent of it diffusing into the room or pre-diffused into the room, prior to coming into the room, that usually works pretty well. Now, also as part of sleep hygiene, you want to get the right kind of light exposure. So first thing in the morning, you want to expose yourself to bright light. Ideally, that'd be happening because you actually see the sun, but we live in Alberta. So in our environment, using a therapy light is an option. Lots of people have trouble sleeping, avoid light in the morning, but it really does help you to create a proper sleep rhythm if you can achieve some light exposure for about 30 minutes. And also during the day, 10-minute bursts of bright light are helpful. You can buy therapy lights. I mean, again, they're not perfect. They're not going to solve all your problems, but you certainly can get a good rhythmicity going with that. The second aspect to light is to avoid things that are too lit up in the hour before bed. And of course, the obvious thing is all screened electronics. So the bright blue light of most of those really suppresses melatonin responses. And that's the hormone that's associated with the close of the day and the end of the timing of the circadian rhythm. So that combined with, the new artificial lights and the LEDs that we are starting to get in our homes that are more on the blue end, our brains are continuing to think that we're supposed to be awake with all that blue stimulus. So if you need to check a device before bed, try to have it set to the night setting or the red shift setting. If your device doesn't have that built in, you can usually get an app that'll adjust the settings for you. You can use blue light blocking glasses as another option. You can buy those easily nowadays. You can also just dim the lights on your device screens to the very lowest setting possible. Many people also are sensitive to the emissions that the electronics give off when they're kind of close to you, and that can really disturb sleep. So charge any phones or devices well away from where you're sleeping. The farther away, the better, really. I saw a statistic that actually said that 10% of kids between the age of 13 and 18 are woken by their devices at night. So if you have a kid, take away the device, put it where yours is on the charger, and hopefully you'll train them out of peering at it every time it bleeps. Spouses too, of course. Now, it's also important as a factor to learn how to create the relaxation response and really come down off of the energy of the day into a more relaxing routine. So as it is with the light-dark rhythms, your cortisol responses are supposed to be highest when you're awake and lowest when you're not. So that's your major long-term stress hormone. So this is the rationale that we're using when we're supplementing you with stress support in the beginning of the day and stress support of a different type at the end of the day. So wind down time for people is often happening when they first get into bed. Then they think they're not falling asleep fast enough, but in reality, they have very unrealistic expectations about how quickly they can relax. Your body is not a machine with an off switch that you just pull mentally. So I'm surprised how many people feel like shutting their eyes should just shut everything off. It's not that easy. So in the evening, for the hour before bed, create a routine. Dim your lights. That sends a signal that it's time to go towards sleep. Shut down all the busy stuff in the house. This might be the time to read for yourself or have a family story. And novels that are lighter are always better, things that are a little bit easier and quicker to read. That can take maybe 40 minutes. Everybody's a little bit different. It takes different amounts of time. When you're coming down off shift work, as an example, you're going to want to be careful about actually spending the time to come down off of that shift work before you go to bed, even if you end up coming home and going to bed relatively quickly. Have a cup of tea, do something that doesn't create stress. Don't pay your bills before bed. There's role and responsibility time, and then there's sleep restoration time. And so it's really a habit that has to be established. Sometimes you can just set an alarm for your wind down process so you know when you should be heading off to bed. Something actually goes off on my phone that says you should be getting ready to go to bed. I don't even know if I set that or not, but so that's possible. It does do that automatically. And during the day too, it's important to learn how to relax. Take little mini breathing breaks in the day. You have to keep the relative amount of stress down. That will help so much. Now, there's other ways that we can kind of handle that. Studies have really found that regular meditation can have long-term benefits for our sleep cycles, and that can really help insomnia. It helps us to relax physically and mentally. It's changing your focus, right, away from your daily life. There's lots of effective meditations that you can do to support cycles of sleep. If you don't have very much experience with meditation, or you don't know where to start with guided meditations. That really helps you ease into a state of relaxation. You can also use breathing techniques to achieve this. A personal favorite of mine, both personally and in the clinic, is to learn how to use the heart math techniques to just calm and recenter yourself. And if you can use that even for 5 to 10 minutes as part of a wind down routine, it doesn't have to last a long time to have a good impact on you. And again, you're just getting the rhythm of that going. Very, very important to create rhythm in life. It's one of the things that really mitigates between your metabolic pole, what's going on in your metabolism in your limbs, and what's going on in your head. It's that rhythmic center, your heart and your lungs, paying attention to your breath, paying attention to your heart rate. Those things, focusing on the center, creates balance in the other two ends. So there's just different ways of doing that. Now, if you're one of those people that really spends a lot of time thinking at night, you can actually practice just letting the thoughts go in advance of sleep. And we talked already about, if you're acutely anxious about it, how you can reframe that. But you can also just spend 10 minutes, maybe in that cool down period, or even a little bit before, writing down the thoughts that are going to tend to arise at night. And you can write them down, whatever style works for you to kind of express them. They don't have to be fancy. You can burn it later. Nobody has to read it. And then in the night, if your mind starts, you can tell yourself, I already thought about that, and we will have time tomorrow. Now is the time to sleep. So when you limit set that way, you're establishing that you're off duty during sleep time, and it insulates your sleep more from intrusive thoughts. And it's a skill. It gets better with practice. Another idea is to keep a gratitude journal. Just jot down the good things that happened to you. I belong to a little group of about 7 women, and we get together every 2 weeks to reinforce for each other what things are going right. And, just recently with events that have been going on, one of my group mates is a wonderful woman who's been wanting to run a sailing retreat. She's an amazing sailor and therapist, and she wanted to combine a whole bunch of things in one. And she ended up having to, of course, postpone this. And it's a big dent. But what she said was, at the end of our visit, just focusing, basically she just sat for a while, just letting everybody else focus on the good stuff that was going on. And we cheered her up so much, she totally snapped out of it. And, sometimes we need to do that for ourselves, or, with other people in our families. Just review at the end of the day what went right, what things are good in life, so that you're not bringing the energy of all the things that, you can't resolve in the 5 minutes before bed with you into sleep. Now, there's obviously some other little physical things that can happen here. There are certain things that you can adjust that make your sleeping more challenged. And the most common one that people know about is caffeine. Caffeine used as a common sleep disturbance creator. And in a healthy person with good liver detox, caffeine will still be active for about 8 hours. So if you're not a great detoxer, the effect will be even longer. Caffeine delays sleep onset. It decreases total sleep time. It decreases your sleep efficiency, and it decreases stage 2 sleep. Alcohol is another confounder. So about 13% of adults between the ages of 18 and 35, statistically, use alcohol to make themselves sleepier. And that use can be long-term. Most people are using that for more than a month at a time. So alcohol is a major cause of sleep disordered breathing and decreased oxygen saturation. And an alcoholic, somebody who's been addicted to alcohol or spent many years drinking, can suffer even years after full alcohol withdrawal because there's changes the brain undergoes during active drinking. Now, of course, if you're using alcohol to fall asleep and you're not addicted to it, that effect is not going to be as marked, but it does have a very marked effect on the breathing apparatus. And like we were just saying before, rhythm and breathing and heart rate and cardiovascular states is very, very important to sleep quality. Another thing that can happen is poor carbohydrate balance in the diet can contribute to sleep issues. So low carb diets and high sugar consumption, not just bad kinds of sugar before bed or throughout the day, have actually been shown to be contributing factors to the difficulties that people have sleeping. And as we've discussed in previous webinars, good dietary balance can make a huge difference across the board in health, and sleep is no exception. We've already talked about, what does the metabolism look like ideally? And there's different answers for different people. But what I've noticed is that if the metabolism is working efficiently for that person, a lot of those sleep parameters are also normalized. Now, I'm sure that most of you thought I might just spend this whole webinar talking about natural medicines for sleep. And I really wanted to avoid that because, like I said, at the end of the day, there's most of the sleep disturbance issues are behavioral or they're stress induced. Now, what you'll notice amongst natural medicines that we use for sleep is that they're almost all related to sleep-wake cycle and stress because cortisol and melatonin are basically inversions of each other. And so, and they're supposed to be inversions of each other. And so people who have a lot of stress screw up their sleep cycles. So a lot of the things that we use naturally for sleep are adaptogens. They're things that help your stress gland recuperate from what life is doing to it. Or more clearly, what not being able to cope always with the level of stress that you're under is doing to it. There are classes of herbs that are sedative hypnotic herbs, so things that are actually going to induce a mild sedating effect to the central nervous system. I use those less frequently because most of the time the main problem in the sleep is going to be stress. But where we have people who are really struggling with it, we will do things like using a Scholzia, which is California poppy, or we'll use Scutellaria laterifolia, that's skullcap. So Piper methysticum, that's kava. There's different herbs that are known to have like this more strong effect on inhibiting the central nervous system. The pharmaceutical drugs are mostly about doing that, except they do it in a much more marked way. It's one of the reasons why there can be, like the morning after effect of that, because you're not inducing totally normal sleep with that. You can have quite a bit of side effects with doing those things. With a sedative hypnotic herbs, if they're in a reasonable dose, you don't see that. But my preference for most people is to teach them how to deal with their stress or use things that mitigate stress. So the ones that we typically use in office for sleep as a result are things like Compro or Somnipro. Or we'll use adaptogens in the morning, like the TADs and the GSFs and the adrenal adaptogens that are herbal. We have a number of different ones like that. And we put them in combination where we're putting adrenal supports in or adaptogens closer to the beginning of the day, and then different kinds of adaptogens that are more relaxing towards the end of the day, or the sedative hypnotic herbs. There are a handful of other things from a nutrient perspective as well that can play a role. Often we're using kind of brain active compounds. Obviously in the Somnipros and the Compros, we're using theanine, or sometimes we'll use formulations that have more GABA in them. We may also have somebody who needs melatonin, like actually reset the sleep cycle because it's been screwed up from jet lag or shift work. If you do shift work, I really do recommend that you do pulsed melatonin at the proper bedtimes, and you do that over the long term, because shift work has been shown to be an independent risk factor for all sorts of different disease states because of the sleep disturbance. So I don't want to say too much more about it than that, but if you have used some of those things in the past, you'll know that they don't knock you out. They're not meant to. They're meant to create enough relaxation so that the normal sleeping mechanisms can take over. So this is just a quote from a long ago philosopher that's says, take a rest. A field that has rested gives a bountiful crop. And pay attention to your sleep. Very, very important. Now, I just wanted to talk to you about, I know right now circumstances are very interesting, and I'm assuming that people are probably not sleeping the very best at this moment, trying, but maybe not, especially if you are at home. And so I hope you guys saw this on my email earlier today. I keep trying to keep kind of clinic updates for you as we're going through these set of circumstances. But what I'd like to do in this next couple of weeks is actually have like a happy hour, an Align happy hour. So Align being that second major phase of the whole life medicine model, and start to teach you some of these stress handling techniques and to walk you through some meditations. I'm thinking about doing like hopefully a morning happy hour, maybe from like 9 to 9:30, 9:45, and just actually connect to each other, answer questions about things that are going on, maybe do some meditative work, do some skill set work about how we can all learn to be more resilient in the face of all of our stressors, not just epidemic, pandemic stressors, but also all the other ones that are just as important, probably more so. I hope you're getting the message from me that I want you to not be afraid right now. I think it's really important for immune status to find your center. And so hopefully we can all find a bit of a time, for at least for the foreseeable future, where we can just connect to each other. I think lots of people are feeling a little bit stir crazy, and could really use some of this time to work on what needs to be worked on. So please drop us an email if you're interested in that. We've had tons of people already today email the clinic about wanting to be on the list for Align Happy Hour, and I'm hoping to get another notice out about that tomorrow so we can organize it a little bit. And then obviously this is our very last, technically, of the season webinar for March. This is as far as I had planned originally on the original dozen that we started last year. I hope that you guys have participated in lots of them. If you haven't seen some of these on the Whole Life Medicine site, you will find the events page, and there is actually a video, like a hosted video link right on that website. You can watch the videos right on that website, or you can go outside onto our YouTube channel as well. The links are all there. So next up, because this was March, Sleep 101, I believe we're going to be doing medicinal mushrooms first. I haven't totally organized which one is going to go in what order, but I had a request for medicinal mushrooms and immunity. And so we're going to start there. I've had lots of interesting requests. If there's any topics that you're thinking that you might like to hear about, please let me know. Usually I can work it in somehow. So you'll get the next list before the end of next month, because I think we're going to plan for medicinal mushrooms at the end of April. Now, what else did I have to say about that? Not much. I think that kind of brings us to the end of sleep. Has anybody got any questions that they want to throw up on the chat box while I'm here? Is anybody out there? I know at least 30 of you are out there right now. In complete and total silence. It's kind of like being, I have my own soapbox. Like every month I could say anything I really wanted. Nobody ever talks back to me. Unless you guys type it in the chat box and I can kind of see it. No burning questions. Oh, I'm seeing one. Do the apps disturb your sleep simply because of EMF pollution? Like, do you mean did the phones disturb your sleep because of EMF pollution? Yes, quite possibly. I think some people are substantially more sensitive to that. If your nervous system already has a lot going on in it, then people tend to be more sensitive to EMF fields under those conditions. It's not just, electromagnetic. Obviously, there's also other kinds of fields that are interacting with our phones. So there's definitely a subset of people that have higher sensitivity to EMFs. It's one of the reasons why we end up doing a lot of those stress oriented, MVita remedies. I encourage everybody to do their stress, like all of their core conflict stress remedies. The more we can peel off of you, the less likely you are to be responsive to those smaller pieces, or even major pieces. Actually, you just become more resilient. You're not as responsive. Okay, so at the end of the day, I'm hoping to see a whole bunch of you in the next little while. I'm still around at the clinic. We're doing video conferencing and phone conferencing, and of course, essential in-office visits, as we are considered an essential service until further notice. So I think of you all often. I'm hoping you're all doing well out there, and hopefully we'll all be on the meditation group together in this next little while. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, because I really hope that you are doing well, and I always really enjoy just being able to kind of have this opportunity to tell you about topics that I think you should know about. So we'll see you for either meditation or medicinal mushrooms next. Have a splendid evening, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for watching. I love to connect to my patient community to inform and inspire, and I hope you'll join us again in the near future. Don't forget to check out whole-life-medicine.com for more webinars and events.